Hey, good morning. How you going? As you can probably see, I am at church. This week I'm here because we are running HSC Study Hall, or as we're calling it this year, HSC Study Break, because people are studying at a distance in their homes, but they're coming to church and we're feeding them lunch. So if you want to pray for the Year 12s as they study this week and next week and into the future for their upcoming HSC exams, which are obviously being done in a very strange setting, that'd be really wonderful. Thanks. Today we have a look at Acts chapter 18. We're following Paul on his missionary journey, and I love these chapters where we get to see like what's going on in the mission life of Paul and how God is using him to do ministry and how God is weaving this like incredible story together. And in chapter 18, we get a little bit more of that incredible story to see how God pieces things together. The chapter begins with Paul arriving in Corinth, which is in the lower part of Greece, a place that is called Achaia. I actually don't know how to say this word, but it's spelled Achaia. And Corinth is the biggest city in this region. And Paul goes there, and as is his habit, he speaks in the synagogue to the Jews and the Greeks who go to the synagogue. Eventually, he's kicked out of the synagogue by the crowd, although we're told that the synagogue leader becomes a Christian and many people are baptized. But he's kicked out of the synagogue, so he goes next door to this person's house, Titius Justus, and he preaches there for a while until the people of the city, the Jews, go to the proconsul, who is the Roman official in the area, and whinge about Paul's ministry. The proconsul says, "I don't care. Seems like a bit of infighting. Sort out your own problems." And then there's a bit of a tussle, and then we find out that Paul actually stays in Corinth for some time, at least a year and a half, probably more than that. And after that, actually, one of the most important things that happens in Corinth is that he meets Priscilla and Aquila, who are fellow tent makers with Paul. They have the same trade, and they are also Jews who have converted to the way of Jesus. And so he has an affinity with them. They have a lot in common, and he calls them his partners in ministry quite regularly. They seem to be quite significant players in the early church. But he travels with them from Corinth, and he is off to Syria, and he leaves Priscilla and Aquila in Ephesus. And when they're in Ephesus, Priscilla and Aquila meet a man called Apollos. I think Apollos is a fascinating person to think about. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just hashing out what this guy was like. So we're told in verse 24, there was a Jew named Apollos who was native of Alexandria, which is Egypt, and he was in Ephesus. He was a learned man, so he's educated, which was not very common back in those days, and he had a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. He had been instructed, and this is what I find so interesting, he had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately, though he only knew the baptism of John, which means he didn't actually know the ministry of Jesus, he only knew the ministry of John the Baptist and the baptism of John the Baptist. So this guy, he speaks fervently, he instructs in the way of the Lord, he teaches about Jesus accurately, and yet he doesn't actually even know Jesus. He never actually heard Jesus speaking. He knows that there was one to be coming, because John spoke about the one who was coming who would be greater than himself, but Apollos doesn't know the ministry of Jesus, and he teaches accurately about him. Anyway, so Priscilla and Aquila hear him speaking in the synagogue, and they go, "Wow, this guy is quite a preacher." They invite him into their home, and even though they've recognized that he's a very, very established and capable preacher, they want to help him to understand the way of God more adequately. So they invite him into their home. They would have served him food and maybe just had a conversation with him about the ministry of Jesus. Most importantly, I imagine the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and the descension of the Holy Spirit for all believers. We're not actually told about whether Apollos has this encounter with the Holy Spirit here, like we're told so many other times. happens in the book of Acts. But it's fascinating to think about that conversation that happened there. And then we're told that after this conversation, Apollos, he goes to Achaia, or that place I don't know how to pronounce, which, remember, the capital city is Corinth, and he preaches there, and he is an encouragement to the disciples there because he vigorously refutes the Jewish opponents in public debate. Remember, he's a wonderful public speaker, and he proves from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah. What I find really interesting about all this is that when you go and read the letters that Paul will later write to the church at Corinth, he actually speaks quite a bit about Apollos in those letters. Paul talks about himself as being the one who planted the seed of the church that was in Corinth, but he speaks about Apollos as the one who watered it. So he's the one who kind of came in after Paul and really helped them along the pathway of discipleship. But then Paul says overall, God was the one who brought about the growth. So I wonder if there's people who are in your life who have these raw talents of sharing the message of Jesus, or maybe they're just great communicators, but they don't know the way of Jesus accurately, or they don't know it adequately, or something like that. And maybe this is an invitation for you to get behind those people and see God use them in incredible ways. Anyway, continue to enjoy the story of Acts as it unfolds, as I will as well. See you later.